Hi everyone, watch this story till the end. It's very heartwarming story. Let's start. He started coming the week after the snowstorm, always around the same time, just before sunset, when the light in the sky turned the whole neighborhood a kind of soft gold, like a memory you couldn't quite touch. I saw him from the kitchen first, thought he was a stray just passing through. But then I noticed he didn't wander, he didn't sniff or mark or dig. He just sat right across the street, facing our building, looking straight at the third floor, looking at our window. At my son, Caleb hadn't spoken in 47 days, not since the accident, not since the world turned sideways and left him with a chair instead of legs, and a silence instead of laughter. I tried everything: therapy books, flashcards, music. I even left the room once and shouted from the hallway, hoping distance would break the spell. It didn't. His eyes followed me sometimes, but his mouth never opened. The first day the puppy came. Caleb was sitting in the bay window, blanket around his legs, his wheelchair pulled close. Like always, I was behind him, folding laundry. The puppy sat across the street and just stared for a long time, tail still, ears up, head slightly tilted. It was eerie, honestly, like he wasn't looking at a window. He was looking at a person the second day he came back, and the third always at the same time, always facing Caleb's window on the fifth day I walked outside. I didn't want to scare him, so I stayed on the steps. "Hey there," I said softly. "You lost, buddy?" He didn't move, just turned his head toward me briefly, then looked back at the window like I wasn't the person he came for. His coat was thick silver and black, like smoke over ice. His ribs were visible but not desperate. He wasn't shaking, he wasn't whining, he was just waiting. I called animal control that night. They said they'd send someone the next morning. But when I mentioned he wasn't aggressive, just still, they paused. "Maybe he's watching over something?" The woman said, "Sometimes they do that the next morning." I looked out early, he wasn't there, but just before sunset, like clockwork. He returned, sat down, faced the window, and this time Caleb moved. He leaned forward just a little, enough to place his palm against the glass. His eyes were wide, focused. His lips didn't move, but his expression. Diddy wasn't gone. He wasn't lost. He was watching back. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to break the spell. I stood behind the couch and just watched them. One child behind glass, one puppy in the snow. Both of them silent, both of them broken in different ways, but somehow in that moment whole. The days passed, the visits continued. I stopped calling animal control. Instead, I started leaving scraps of chicken near the sidewalk. A bowl of water warmed from the kettle. I didn't put it too close. I didn't want to scare him off, and yet each night the bowl would be empty. The meat gone, and still he came back, not for food, not for me. For Caleb one afternoon, I opened the window just an inch. "Why him?" I whispered. "Why do you come here?" He didn't blink, just looked at me, and then slowly his ears lowered, not in fear. In softness. That was the day Caleb whispered something. I was in the kitchen pouring tea when I heard it, barely audible. "Mom," I dropped the cup, tea splashed across the floor, but I didn't care. I ran to the window. Caleb didn't look at me. He was staring down at him. "I want to go outside," he said. My heart cracked so loudly I thought I'd fall. I got the chair, the gloves, the coat, the scarf. I didn't care that it was freezing or that the sidewalks were slick. I just opened the door and rolled him out onto the porch. The puppy stood the second the door opened. He didn't run, didn't bark. He walked slowly, carefully across the street, stopped at the foot of our ramp, and waited. Caleb reached his hand down, shaking but steady. The puppy stepped forward, one paw, then another, and rested his forehead against my son's hand. Caleb didn't cry. I did the next day. He came back again, and this time I opened the gate. "Come on in," I said, and he did. I don't know how he knew where to go, or why he trusted us. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something deeper, something broken, recognizing something, healing. All I know is that he walked up the ramp like he'd done it 100 times before, stopped in front of Caleb and sat down just like always, but this time Caleb reached out and touched him without hesitation. No gloves, no prompting, bare skin to fur. The puppy leaned into it, eyes soft, ears forward, no tail wagging, no jumping. Just calm, present, like he'd been waiting his whole short life for this moment. He's not scared of the chair, Caleb said quietly. It was the first full sentence I'd heard in almost 2 months. No, I whispered. He's not scared of anything. We let him stay on the porch that day. Caleb sat beside him, wrapped in blankets, asking him questions he didn't expect answers to. Where do you go at night? Do you have a name? Did someone leave you too? The puppy didn't answer, of course, but he stayed. And when the wind picked up, he inched closer to Caleb's side and laid his chin gently on his lap. Caleb didn't move for a long time, just sat there stroking his head with that slow, careful hand. And when the sun dipped low and the sky turned purple, I said, "Time to go in, baby." Caleb nodded but didn't look at me. Can he come back tomorrow? If he wants to, I said. He will, Caleb replied like it wasn't a question. The next morning I called the shelter myself. I gave them the description age. Maybe 8 months, coat silver and black. Like a winter storm, no collar, no chip, no tags. I gave them our address, asked if anyone had reported a dog like that missing. Nothing. Matches, the woman said. Can we foster him, I asked. Has he come inside? Not yet. Well, she said, if he does call us again, we'll start the paperwork. That afternoon, he didn't wait across the street. He was already on our porch when Caleb rolled to the window, sitting tall, watching Caleb open the door himself. I stood back, just in case, but I didn't need to worry. The puppy Rose climbed the ramp and nudged Caleb's hand like they'd been friends forever. He came inside that night, not far, just to the edge of the living room rug. He sniffed once, then curled into a tight ball beside the window. Caleb wheeled over, sat next to him, and didn't speak for a while. Then he asked, can I name him? I nodded, yeah, honey, you can. Caleb looked at him a long time, then said, Shadow, why Shadow? Because he came when I couldn't move, and now he's with me wherever I go. That night I left the living room light on, just a dim lamp, low and warm. I found Caleb asleep in his chair blanket. Pulled up to his chin, Shadow curled against the base of the wheels. I didn't move them. Didn't lift him, just covered them both with an extra quilt and sat nearby watching them breathe in sync in all the silence that filled our apartment. Since the crash, that moment made it feel full again, whole alive the next morning. Shadow followed Caleb into the bathroom, then to breakfast, then into his room. He didn't leave his side once, like he knew not just what Caleb needed, but what he'd lost and what he was finally finding. Again, Shadow didn't act like a puppy, not in the way you'd expect. He didn't chew shoes or bark at doorbells. He didn't spin in circles, chasing his tail, or leap at furniture like gravity didn't exist. He moved with a kind of silent discipline, always one step behind Caleb, always watching, always waiting, like he had a job and he wasn't going to fail it. When I took them outside, Shadow didn't pull on the leash. He didn't need one. He walked beside the wheelchair, head low, glancing up at Caleb every few steps as if to check, you good, I'm still here, let's keep going. Neighbors started to notice one of them. Mr. Sanders stopped raking leaves just to stare. That's your dog, he asked. I hesitated. He came to us. I said. Sanders nodded slowly. Looks like he knew where he was going. At the park? Shadow ignored squirrels, ignored barking dogs, ignored kids with sticky fingers, reaching toward his face. The only thing he paid attention to was Caleb. When the wheels of the chair bumped too hard over a crack in the path, Shadow would stop and look back until Caleb studied. When a basketball rolled too close, he shifted to block it, calm but firm. A silent protector, he didn't need training. He just knew one afternoon. Caleb dropped his glove. I didn't even see it, but Shadow did. He paused, doubled back, picked it up in his mouth and placed it on Caleb's lap. No fanfare, no waiting for praise, just did it and moved on. Caleb beamed like the sun came out just for him that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. My heart felt stretched like something long frozen had finally started to thaw. This dog, this quiet, strange, beautiful animal, had walked into our lives like a ghost with purpose. And somehow, without words, without promises, without warning, he'd started healing the parts I didn't know were still broken. Not just in Caleb, in me. We never found out where Shadow came from. I printed flyers posted in local groups called shelters and rescues. No one claimed him. No one had seen him before. It was like he'd stepped out of the snow itself and made our home his destination. Eventually, I stopped asking some stories. Don't begin with an answer. They begin with presence, the kind that sits beside you in silence and waits for the storm to pass. The kind that never tries to fix you, just stays close while you figure it out yourself. Shadow started sleeping under Caleb's bed. We bought him a proper cushion, but he never used it. He preferred the space where he could hear Caleb breathe every night just before lights out. He'd lay his head on the frame nose inches from Caleb's fingers. And every morning when I opened the door, I'd find them like that boy and dog still, and connected like the night hadn't touched. Then one morning I came in early. Caleb wasn't in bed, I panicked. Called his name, then I heard it, quiet laughter. I followed the sound to the living room. There they were. Caleb was sitting on the couch, not the chair, Shadow beside him, head in his lap. Caleb had gotten there by himself, used the wall pulled, dragged, shifted. Shadow had stayed by his side the whole time. Why didn't you call me? I asked, breath catching. Caleb smiled because he was with me. I looked at the dog. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his eyes told me everything. He hadn't come to be rescued. He'd come to rescue the first time we took them to the rehab center together. People stared, some with surprise, some with curiosity, but most with that expression that falls somewhere between recognition and reverence. Like they were seeing something sacred and couldn't quite explain why Shadow didn't flinch in the unfamiliar space. The automatic doors, the echoing halls, the beeping monitors, none of it rattled him. He walked beside Caleb's chair like they were tethered by more than just routine. Like he could feel the hesitation in Caleb's breath and was there to absorb it step by step. Dr. Ramos, Caleb's physical therapist, kneeled down beside the dog and reached a hand forward. Shadow didn't move, didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. He just watched her, measured, still aware. Then after a full 10 seconds of silence, he lowered his head gently into her palm. No wag, no show, just acceptance. Where'd you find him? She asked me later. We didn't, I said. He found us. Caleb's sessions changed after that. He pushed harder, sat taller, held the bars with less fear. One afternoon, he slipped, his legs gave out, and he crumpled into a soft pile on the mat before I could move. Shadow was there, not barking, not whining, just pressing close enough for Caleb to reach his shoulder. Caleb gripped his fur and whispered, I'm okay, not to me, to him. After that, Shadow became an unofficial assistant. He'd lay near the mats during stretches, sit beside the balance bar. When Caleb worked on posture, he never interfered, but he never left the room. People began to talk. They said Caleb's eyes had changed, brighter, more focused, not every day, not always, but enough that you couldn't deny it. One of the staff members approached me in the hallway, a man named Thomas who'd lost his own son in a car crash the year before. That dog, he said, voice hoarse, he doesn't just help your boy, he helps me remember. That night, I sat on the porch with Shadow. While Caleb showered, the sky was deep orange dusk bleeding into the buildings, like fire through fog. I rubbed behind his ears and whispered, Do you know what you're doing? He looked at me with those glacier dark eyes, not warm, not pleading, just present and steady. You're not just a dog, I said. You're something else, aren't you? The wind moved through the trees. Shadow closed his eyes, and I realized he didn't need to answer. Because whatever he was, he'd already made his choice. One evening after therapy, we stopped by the park. A boy was sitting on a bench with a cast on his leg. He looked down when we passed, clearly not in the mood to talk. But Shadow slowed, paused, walked up to the boy, and simply sat at his feet. No prompting, no instruction. The boy didn't reach for him, but after a while his hand dropped low and rested on Shadow's back. They sat like that for 6 minutes. When we left, the boy smiled just once. Caleb noticed. He knew, he said before we did. I nodded. Shadow trotted ahead, tail low, ears twitching in the wind, not searching for praise, just checking the path, making sure it was still safe, making sure we were still following. Shadow began to draw people to him. Not because he tried, he never did. It was his stillness, the quiet gravity he carried, the way he looked at you. Like he already knew what part of you was hurting, and maybe in some way only he understood. He was already healing it at the rehab center. Staff started timing their breaks to match Caleb's sessions. Not for Caleb, but for Shadow. Nurses knelt beside him between patients. A janitor left a clean towel near the water bowl every morning. Even the cafeteria staff learned he liked his carrots cold and sliced lengthwise, but he never begged, never demanded, he only took what was freely offered. Dr. Ramos began referring to him as a mirror dog. They don't fix things, she told me once. They reflect them back gently. Let you see your strength in a different shape. I'd never heard that term before, but with Shadow it fit. He wasn't pulling Caleb forward, he was walking beside him, while Caleb found the will to move on his own. One afternoon, a child was wheeled into the therapy room, screaming, not in pain, but panic. A girl, maybe 7, her arms wrapped tight around her stomach, like she could hold her fear inside. The staff tried, they brought toys, gentle voices, music, nothing worked. Shadow stood, he walked to her wheelchair with that same measured grace. Sat down in front of her, didn't make a sound at first, she didn't notice. But slowly her sobs quieted. Her eyes found his shadow, leaned in just enough to let his nose rest on the side of her chair. She reached out, touched him, and whispered soft. That was the only word she spoke that week. The next day, she asked if he could stay longer. Shadow didn't look at her. He just stayed that night. I watched Caleb draw for the first time since the accident. He didn't say much, just hunched over the kitchen table. Focused pencil dragging across the paper with quiet purpose. When he was done, he held it up. It was Shadow. Not just a dog, but something more, wings made of smoke, rising off his back eyes like moons. A faint glow around his chest like he was lit from inside. "What's that light?" I asked. Caleb shrugged. "That's where he keeps the pieces." I frowned. "What pieces?" "The broken parts," he said softly. "From other people he carries them so they don't have to." I couldn't speak. I just stared at the sketch while Shadow slept at Caleb's feet. Later, after bedtime, I sat on the floor beside him. My fingers moved through his thick fur, settling into the warm space behind his ear.